Hello, my name is Max Rikers, and I will talk about my article with the title Indo-European Women and Evangelism in Central Java During the 19th Century. So my article talks about Christianity in the Indies in Central Java during the 19th century, where in the middle of the 19th century, the evangelization efforts experienced a revival. Which was mainly started by Dutch people who came from the Netherlands with their evangelization organizations and with their, of course, Dutch ways and customs and culture. However, there were also Indo-Europeans in the Indies who were descendants from Europeans and Asians, in this case, mostly Javanese. And they grew up among the Javanese and the Dutch. So they were familiar to both cultures, and having parents from both these cultures, they also, of course, had very mixed identity, which helped them to be pioneers in the evangelization of Central Java. So here raises the question, why and how did these Indo-European women succeed while the Dutch missionaries failed so miserably? Um, the The boundaries of my research is around the colonial administrative area of Bagulan, which is modern-day Banyumas, Purbalingga, Banjarnegara, Kebumen, Wonosobo, and Purworejo, and it's roughly from 1858 until 1877, when the main Indo-European women carried out their religious activities. The method that is used is the historical method by Kunto, which consists of choosing a theme, which is my title. Afterwards, collecting of sources. I use historical sources from various Dutch missionaries who interacted with the Indo-European woman brought up in my article. And also, of course, secondary and tertiary sources. Before moving on to heuristics or verification of data, which I did with comparing all those various accounts with one another before I could interpret the collected and already verified data before starting to write my final result, which is the article. So the evangelization started in Banyumas with Van Oostrum in 1858, around that year, because in 1858 she had her first nine students who worked at her house as servants or at her batik factory, were baptized in Semarang, because at the time there was no Dutch missionary yet in Central Java. They were prohibited because the government was scared of religious unrest. And she actually was the first one to start, and she also inspired her sister, Willemse, who also lived in Banyumas, to start a similar community. Her sister-in-law, Philips, in Purworejo in 1860 to start her own community, and also, presumably, Brouwer, who lived in Kutuarjo, which were all places not very far from each other. And there presumably might have been others, however, um, historical accounts do not yet show those other steps. There are still some sources left, which would be further delved into. However, after the first students were baptized in 1858 and 1860, especially Van Oostrum and Philips, they developed their own communities around their yard, around their servants, and they started to communicate with Dutch missionaries around Java, and also had Javanese students of Christianity sent to them. For example, Tunggul Wulung, who eventually became a pioneer in his own area. The first Dutch missionary actually came to Banyumas in 1865, Vermeer. However, Van Oostrum did not like this actually, because she wanted to remain in control of the evangelization. She did not want Vermeer to take over her duties, to take over her community. And in the following conflict, Vermeer actually decided to move away to Purbalingga, because he did not want the conflict to further devolve, of course. and with him also thus arrived the first formal Dutch evangelization organization. Van Oostrum afterwards, her activities remained the same actually until her death in 77, which was always centered around her house, around her servants, and around the workers at her factory. And after she passed away, she actually left a vibrant community behind. However, since there was no one else to take over her work, there actually was also no Dutch missionary able to do so, which caused her community to gradually decline at the turn of the century. However, Phillips, she actually expanded on Van Oostrom's initial work with the arrival of Sadrach in 69. They together started evangelization tours into the interior, which led to an exponential increase in followers, which also in turn led to a conflict with the church in Purworejo, who had initially helped Phillips also with baptizing students. However, because there were too many Javanese, the Dutch church did not like this, and they separated the communities into two, Javanese and Dutch, with their own elders, which caused Phillips in turn to erect her own bamboo church in her yard to keep on holding sacred services for all of her followers, which were also rising in numbers in quite fast pace. And during the 70s until 73, Sadrach would often go into the interior. He would hold propaganda. He would prepare the field, as to say, for Phillips to come and to teach the potential students, which led to an ultimate around 2,500 people who were eventually baptized during special tours when Vermeer, for example, would join them. However, after 73, she fell ill and was unable to continue. And after her passing in 76, Sadrach would evolve this community into the Kristen Djawi community, which would even grow more fast than before. So what was so interesting or special about these two women? Well, Van Oostrum, she owned her own batik factory, which was very renowned. So she was, of course, quite well educated. She could read. And it started with her reading verses from the Bible in Dutch and afterwards explaining it into Javanese and explaining the meaning. And she would also start to hold sacred services at her yard. And when the Javanese around her became interested, she would also teach them about the Bible, about the Ten Commandments, 12 Articles of Faith, and Our Father prayer, which led to the first ones being baptized in 1858. And she was really the pillar of her community. She made all the decisions about, you are ready to learn, you are ready to be baptized, I teach you this. And she was also the one who would ask for me to come. So please come, please baptize my students, please give them sacraments. And she would also communicate with other missionaries and take on students, Javanese students as well, who would for a short amount of time stay with her. Her sister-in-law was inspired by her and also pushed by Van Oostrum to follow her example. However, she did not only follow, she actually developed her methods. And there are also more accurate accounts about her sacred services where people would sit on the floor together. Someone would sing part of a evangelic song adapted to the Javanese way of singing, the tembang. And after each part, they would stop. Phillips would explain the meaning, and then they would continue to sing. The same thing also happened with preachings from Dutch missionaries, for example. And they would come together every Sunday and major holiday. And also, on such occasions, they would, for example, decorate their church with green. Also very interesting, she had her own church library. She had Bibles in Javanese. She had books with songs in Javanese, also with musical notes, and she had her own register as well with all the people who were Christians. And of course, the village stores, where she was also a real pillar, the real center of all the activities. She would decide who was ready to learn, who was ready to be baptized, where churches were allowed to be built. She would inaugurate the churches, and she would also appoint the elders of the church. The Dutch had a very negative view actually towards both these figures because of their gender and their ethnicity. And others who claim their honor of evangelizing Central Java or denounce them for their low level of education, and especially the local community had very, very negative reactions to them, which um, where both these Indo-European women played a role as mediator to keep things from evolving into big conflicts. However, they were praised by feminists and more neutral church observers because they succeeded where others had failed so miserably, and they would often fault the church for not guiding and helping them and equipping them with the right knowledge. The Javanese had a very different opinion. They would see Indo-European descent as something that was more because of the Dutch blood, and they would also respect their approach with heavily involving Javanese culture. Also, they would often see them as the Ratu Adil, or the just king, a messianic figure. And especially Philips would also be given the name Gusti Mariam, and her husband, Gusti Yusuf. Gusti meaning the title for a god or a king, and Mariam and Yusuf, of course, referring to Saint Mary and Saint Joseph. They were seen as their reincarnations. And since all these women were of age as well, they were, of course, even more highly respected and seen as the grandmothers of their communities. They saw themselves as um, their great grandchildren, um, with other figures like Sadrach, for example, being seen as the father. So they had their own interpretations of the Bible, which they preached, and they actually became real pioneers in evangelizing Central Java and would leave big and vibrant and very unique Javanese Christian communities behind. Their gender was not an obstacle, while their descent was actually the key in evangelizing. And because of their understanding of the customs and language of the Javanese, they succeeded where the Dutch actually failed miserably. They could also read and write and were quite intelligent and very dominant, and they were able to earn the respect and trust of the Japanese around them. For further research, I could recommend a deeper research into the roles, development of these communities, and how they further shaped the spread of Christianity in Central Java. Thank you.